Taxation is theft. Always has been, always will be. It's astounding to me how anyone can deny that. But that's exactly what current affairs editor and Harvard PhD candidate Nathan J. Robinson has done with this incredifail of an article. It's hard to think anyone who says this really believes it. Really? After listening to all of our reasoning, you just don't think we believe it? How are you any different from a fundy who says that he doesn't think that atheists really doubt the existence of God? Or are you just trying to poison the well right off the bat because you don't really have anything to back it up with? In this country, slavery was a condition under which people could be beaten to death if they refused to work, under which women could be raped, their children sold away from them. Yes, that's how it was in this country. But that doesn't mean that's the definition of slavery. The definition of slavery is ownership of a human being or the fruit of their labor. If you claim that someone else owes you their paycheck or even a portion of it, you are claiming ownership over their labor, their activity as a human being. So that's two blatant bits of sophistry right off the bat. Ocasio-Cortez proposed that if you earn over $10 million a year, every additional dollar should be taxed highly in order to save humanity from the existential crisis of climate change. Without getting into the alarmism surrounding climate change, the issue is still that you're claiming the fruits of someone else's labor. If you claim even a single dollar, you are claiming ownership of that person. There really isn't any way around it. To compare these two situations seems to me to involve such a detachment from reality that I hardly even know where to begin. Well, there's an argument from incredulity, so it seems to me the place you're beginning from is fallaciousness and equivocation. It's kind of unbelievable that an article with so many basic fallacies could have gotten past his editor. Oh, wait. Right. I could make you a list of about 400 ways in which being taxed is not like slavery. For one thing, you get to vote on tax policy. Ah, the old you get to vote canard. Sorry, but if 99 people vote to enslave the 100th, it's still slavery. Remember, slavery was instigated in this country by vote. In fact, it was the very first act of the U.S. Congress under the Articles of Confederation, and it was through an elected representative republic that it was maintained through things like fugitive slave laws. So then, after quoting Robert Nozick, he then goes on to call it sophistry. Projection much? First, the standard Lockean argument for private property is bonkers, based on far more assertion than reasoning. Wow, he's actually denying Lockean self-ownership. It seems to me that it's this article that's based on assertion. As I showed in my video, Libertarianism and Property Rights from First Principles, self-ownership and property rights flow from an unbroken chain of logic from first principles. Logic nobody has thus far been able to assail. I'm also linking to a video from Larkin Rose on property and ownership that explains the issue clearly and shows how Robinson is completely full of crap. All of the questions in this paragraph have been answered and covered at length. Robinson pretending that they aren't just shows how desperate he is, that he has no answer for any of this and just has to pretend that these points remain unanswered. If I go into a public forest and I carve a tree into a totem pole, do I now own the tree? Assuming that public means unowned, then yes, why wouldn't you? Wouldn't anyone who seizes the totem pole be robbing you of the fruits of your labor? How can anyone own anything otherwise? If I open a can of soup in the ocean, spreading the soup far and wide, do I own the ocean? No, because you're not using the ocean, moron! This idea that you can claim pieces of the commons and call them yours is what led P.J. Proudhon to declare that property is theft. By fencing off a park and calling it mine, I am stealing it from other people. They used to have access to it, and now they don't. In order to be stealing it from other people, they have to have ownership of it to begin with. This is where this Marxist crap fails a basic consistency check. If I can't fence off some property and live in it, then I am being excluded from a certain usage. And if I am excluded from that usage, then that means other people own it. And other people have a greater ownership of that property than I do. meaning that it's not a commons. But even if it were, as Larkin Rose goes into, what would it mean for everyone to own something? Ownership requires exclusivity, and without exclusivity, none of us can even own the home we live in or the clothes on our backs, since we would have no basis to stop anyone else from claiming them and taking them away from us. So, by the same token, self-ownership, from which all other forms of ownership spring, means that you are entitled to exclusive access over your own body, mind, and everything you do with it. So again, someone claiming even a portion of it is stealing from you, and claiming at least a degree of ownership over you. The philosophy of property rights is important because the big holes in it make angry conservative appeals to entitlement somewhat nonsensical. If I live on stolen land, taken from a people who held the land as a commons, what on earth am I talking about when I say that it's my land and I'm entitled to the fruit of the labor I put into it? Do you even read your own words? These people held the land. They owned it. It was theirs. They may have decided to own it jointly instead of individually, but they are already making use of it, and therefore it is unavailable to be homesteaded. Idiot! I am not sure why seizing the results from someone's labor is equivalent to directing him to carry on various activities. Stealing someone's wallet means they'll have to work some more if they want to have the same amount of things as before, or they'll have to sit around and wait for some more capital income to accrue, but they won't be punished or killed for not laboring. Wait, so you don't consider losing money to be a form of punishment? Fine, you won't mind then if I hack into your bank account and take everything. I mean, according to you, you don't really own it, so it isn't theft, right? Theft and forced labor are different. No, they aren't. Both are claiming ownership over your labor. The former just does it after the fact. And you will have to labor more if you want to get back to the point where you were before you were robbed. Is taxation theft then? Well, first, I want us to be careful. Deciding whether taxation is theft doesn't actually tell us whether taxation is justified. Theft, by definition, is unjustified. It's amazing that I actually have to point this out. The word theft is used to imply that taxation is illegitimate, but it could be that taxation is both a kind of theft and is completely acceptable. How? Because Jean Valjean was correct to steal that loaf of bread. It wasn't not stealing, but it was fine. No, it wasn't! He might have been in a desperate situation, and we might be able to understand his motive and sympathize with him, but that doesn't mean he was right to do it. Now, the prison sentence he was subjected to was way out of proportion. 5 years from stealing a loaf of bread that turned into 19? But that's the fault of a tyrannical government. As Hugo himself said of Javert and his hatred of rebellion and respect for authority, he rendered them almost bad by dint of exaggerating them. He enveloped in a blind and profound faith everyone who had a function in the state, from the prime minister to the rural policeman. He covered with scorn, aversion, and disgust everyone who had once crossed the legal threshold of evil. He was absolute and admitted no exceptions. It wasn't that Valjean didn't do anything wrong, it's that the punishment was incredibly disproportionate. And by the way, what of Isabeau's labor? Is he not entitled to sell the bread that he made, using ingredients that he paid for, with equipment that he purchased? Is he not entitled to an intact shop window? Was it his fault that Valjean's family was hungry? Did he make the bad winter come? Did he tell Valjean's sister to have 7 children? Or was he just a baker trying to make an honest living? Again, I have to point out how little starvation there is in a free market. It's the tyrannical government itself that's responsible for violating people's self-ownership to the point where the economy got so terrible nobody could find work. But this is a digression at best. I'll point again to how statists have to keep relying on works of fiction to find examples making their point. Unless you believe property rights are absolutes, that there is no other moral consideration that can override them, then we have to weigh the sanctity of ownership against other factors like people's lives. But wait a second, if people's lives are a sanctity, then does that not directly result in self-ownership and all of the other property rights that flow directly from it? I don't think the question of whether taxation is theft is particularly relevant then, because I am somewhat of a utilitarian who thinks a more important question is what differing conceptions of rights produce in terms of justice, and I don't think respect for the property rights of the wealthy is morally justified. Well, whoopee-doo for you! I guess they're just subhumans who aren't deserving of the same moral considerations everyone else is. But let me ask you this. How do you define wealthy? Is it the top 1%? Well, if you make over $33,000 a year, that puts you in the top 1% worldwide. So how are you now not deserving of these property rights? This is the thing we see over and over again about Marxists. They only seem to consider themselves being the beneficiaries of such a system. They never seem to consider the possibility of the system being turned against them. But Robinson might want to consider that someone currently on the PhD track at Harvard might want to consider what other people think about where he is on the socioeconomic scale. A friend of mine is a teacher in the Detroit school system. She tells me that her kids are bright and gracious and wonderful, but they are poorer than you might realize. Gee, in a city that's been under the control of democratic socialists for more than 50 years? Well, what do you know? Now, Jeff Bezos has a net worth of $140 billion. He could change every single one of those children's lives with the money he makes in about 9 seconds. I do not really give a damn whether we decide that it's theft for the state to seize a portion of this wealth, because whatever value we might assign to respecting property rights is outweighed 1,000-fold by the needs of others. The utility differences are staggering. An amount of money that is literally negligible to a billionaire can be of immeasurable assistance to someone who is rationing their insulin. And I suppose that none of the things that he's done has made anyone's lives any better. He just got that money from, what, a portal from another dimension? Or did he get it by founding and running a company that's brought all sorts of products to people all over the world at incredibly low prices? How many people, thanks to Amazon, can get things they wouldn't have been able to afford to get before? Or couldn't have gotten at any price because they live in an area where the selections aren't as good? And how many disabled people and invalids benefit from having these products delivered to their door? And just what do you think is happening to that $140 billion right now? Do you think it's just sitting in some vault at Gringotts or something? Or is it being invested in Amazon and other companies to expand and create jobs? How many people have access to more reliable transportation thanks to his investments in Uber? Oh, and by the way, he already puts a lot of that money into charitable endeavors. There's the Bezos Family Foundation, which funds educational projects, as well as charitable contributions to museums, schools, charities that improve college access to poor people and immigrants, and many others, including endeavors to improve healthcare. Are all of these people supposed to suffer because there are children hungry in a city that was ruefully mismanaged by people who politically agree with you? It's just one more example of the kinds of things so-called utilitarians are not willing to figure into their utility calculations. And by the way, Bezos wasn't able to do all of this because he inherited some big fortune or something. His father owned a bike shop, and his mother was 17 years old and still in high school. His stepfather and adoptive father was a Cuban immigrant. The only thing he got from his family was his grandfather's ranch, which he paid for. Why do you people always ignore the fact that most billionaires in this country are self-made? But there are still good reasons why it's not sensible to refer to taxation as a kind of theft. For one thing, taxation is foundational to a functional market economy. Market economies are driven by voluntary exchanges. Taxation is involuntary, so that rules this possibility out just on the face of it. It's impossible to imagine a world in which everyone received their pre-tax income. Really? 'Cause I don't have any problem imagining it. Neither did L. Neil Smith when he based an entire continent on it in the probability brooch. Maybe the problem is you and the damage your religion is doing to your thinking ability. The government is critical to the existence of the economy. Property rights are enforced by courts. Money is issued by the government. The military protects us. Why don't you read, anything any anarcho-capitalists have ever written about this? This is one more argument from incredulity. You can't imagine any way that these can be done without a single forceful monopoly doing it all, so there must not be a way. Is there any way anyone could possibly be more arrogant? There is no world in which pre-tax income could ever meaningfully belong to its recipients, because without taxes, there is no government, and government is necessary to create the roads, sewers, streetlights, courts, etc. that make obtaining the income possible. Laughably untrue, and it shows that despite a Harvard education, Robinson doesn't actually know anything about history. Governments only had minimal participation in creating roads prior to the 20th century. We somehow managed to muddle along for thousands of years before then. Plenty of people have made their own septic systems, installed their own streetlights. There have always been voluntary courts or arbitration or whatever you want to call them. There are plenty of times we've had money without government, from gold to cryptocurrency. In fact, there's never been a time in history in which 100% of these things were always done by government. The hand of government in creating the economy is present in myriad ways people don't notice. Consider limited liability and bankruptcy protection, two ways the state interferes significantly with property rights in ways favored by business. A corporation is incorporated. It makes money because it exists within a legal structure established by the state, with a set of legal protections afforded by the state. You're saying this as if it were a good thing. But you're actually defending the very thing the government uses to make it so difficult to form and maintain small businesses. And small businesses are the lifeblood of any economy. They just don't get the goodies from the state. There is a dimension of the taxation is theft argument that I think is worth mentioning. The interesting concept of force involved. The argument is quite simple. Taxation is a threat. Give the Leviathan your money or go to jail. And if a private citizen did that, they would be a mugger. But there's another important aspect to this. Not only are you not forced to earn an income or be rich, but you could always go and live somewhere else. Perhaps a floating artificial city. Perhaps Bermuda. Bermuda has a government. Perhaps the moon. There is an important argument that if you choose to continue living in the United States, you accept its social contract. Wow, do I really need to make another video debunking the social contract? I'll just link to my playlist on it instead. You can immediately object by saying that this is not a meaningful choice. A dictator could say, I haven't restricted free speech by banning newspapers because they could always go and publish in some other country. Not everyone has the ability to go and live on the moon. Funnily enough, this is kind of a leftist argument. Choice is not just a matter of whether you consent, but about the pressures that cause you to feel like you have to consent. It's actually what leads us to argue that capitalists are the ones committing systemic theft by forcing you to work longer hours than you would have if they hadn't used a portion of your productivity to make other people rich. Really? So you haven't looked at the economic data either? The poor consistently do better under capitalism as they do under any statist form of economy. People on the right say that you consent to your employment conditions, but for poor workers, that's no different from saying that you consent to the restrictions on your speech imposed by a dictator by choosing not to flee the country. Right, because workers are poor, helpless, stupid people, and they need Harvard people like you to decide what's best for them. Answer me one question. How do you improve these supposed restrictions by taking away people's choices? We can imagine the United States as one big company town. At least if you didn't know what a company town was. Or a block of residences governed by a condo association. Really? Does your condo association send a paramilitary organization to bust into your home and shoot your dog just because you have a few ounces of a plant? Does it go starting wars in foreign countries in your name? Does it take ever-increasing amounts of your paycheck and tell you that it's all for your own good? The free market argument is that you don't have liberties at work or rights against private entities because you contracted with them. If Facebook owns the city and you live there, then you can't complain about the rules Facebook imposes. You can't own a city, moron. Why don't you go reading up on how property rights actually work before mouthing off about them? You can't say that Facebook security officers violated the Fourth Amendment in searching you because the Fourth Amendment doesn't apply to private entities. But by the same token, they can't say I've committed a crime just because I protected myself from this attack by shooting the bastards. Corporations, as Elizabeth Anderson has written, are kind of private dictatorships. By stepping onto their turf, you obey their rules, and you don't have any kind of democratic decision-making power as you do with the United States government. You can't vote for your boss. Look, idiot! Corporations compete for workers. Why do you think Walmart and Target keep increasing their starting pay? They're competing for the best workers. If conservatives will say that employers steal surplus value from employees, I will say that taxation is theft, albeit perfectly justified and democratically voted for theft that is returned to you in the form of countless important services. Geez, reality is not a compromise. You do not get to change basic logic by trying to strike a deal with people who are trying to get you to see things rationally. You can't bargain your way into ignoring the one and only form of logically consistent and universally applicable system of ethics there is. More importantly, though, I do not believe that billionaires have any property right in their wealth in the first place. They have a legal right, but that doesn't mean very much. Legal rights are created by laws, and so if you change the laws, you change the rights. The question is whether there is some kind of natural entitlement to wealthy people having their vast wealth, and there isn't. Yes, there is. They voluntarily traded for it. Except the ones who get their wealth from your holy government through your wonderful taxes that benefit us all oh so much. Every single penny of it was given up voluntarily by people because they felt the product or service they were getting in exchange was worth more than that money was. You don't even understand what an economic transaction is. Any voluntary transaction creates wealth because both sides feel they come away better off for having made it. They both feel as if they get something greater than what they had to give up. But that's something that a small-minded prat like you can never understand because you're stuck in fallacious zero-sum thinking. If someone gets richer, it can only be because they made someone else poorer. Everything you know about economics could fit in a thimble and still leave room for a whole other thimble. Property is, after all, theft to begin with, and just because you manage to obtain something lawfully under a legal system set up by people in your economic class doesn't mean that I have to respect your natural right to it. Alright, let's put this property is theft crap to rest once and for all. If property is theft, then whom did you steal it from? Are you ready? Here we go. Some socialists draw a distinction between personal possessions and private property. They think people should have their possessions, like heirlooms, clothes, a bicycle, respected because these things are for personal use. A factory, on the other hand, is not for personal use and should be held in common by its workers. This is the most bogus distinction possible. You mentioned a bicycle and said that it's personal property. But what if I use that bicycle in my courier business? Does it then become private property that you get to steal for your so-called commons and use? It's the same bicycle. What if I use it for business during the day and personal use during the evening, like going to the store or whatever? What is it then? The highway robber analog for the taxman only works if the highway robber, after taking your wallet, gave you an old age insurance plan and saved your house from a fire and also gave to the poor blah 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 blah. And also if he shot your dog and threw you into a rape cage because you had a few ounces of a plant. And if he started wars in your name overseas. And if he kept coming by day after day after day to do it all over again. Whereas if he didn't take my money, I could voluntarily put that money into an annuity for my old age. I could voluntarily subscribe to a firefighting service, and I could give to the poor myself. I would have a choice, and the providers of these services would have to compete in both price and quality. Apparently, you don't like the fact that I have a choice of what to do with my own money. You want these services to be monopolies. In fact, you want them all to be run by the same monopoly. And don't give me this crap that you're talking about only doing it with the rich. You're forcing these monopolies on all of us, rich, poor, or whatever. So save the proselytizing. The only real difference between this highwayman and the government is the perceived legitimacy the government enjoys from its cult members. If you had a group of highwaymen doing these same things and giving to the poor and all that, but without being considered a government, they would only be considered one thing: an organized crime mob engaging in a protection racket. The mafia actually does give you protection if you're paying into it, but because you're not paying by choice, it's a crime. The only difference is, we call one group the mafia, we call the other group government. Oh, and you're allowed to leave his forest if you don't like his rules. Well, who says it's his forest? If I'm living here, then that portion of the forest is my private property. The highwayman has no moral power to take it from me, and neither does government. Government is just a group of people. So under a consistent system of universally applicable ethics, they have no legitimacy in doing things that would be illegitimate for anyone else to do. You want to give them a special status, and like Javert, you want to consider everything they scribble down and call the law to be objective reality. You want to give them higher powers, greater rights. You want to make them high priests in a cult. But words like robbery and slavery simply do not apply. The aspect of those acts that make them so appalling are simply not present in a typical tax regime. Except, as I've shown, they absolutely are. And it's nauseating to hear the most pampered and freest people on earth complaining that they are being subjected to a wrong because they have to contribute some pittance to schooling for the children of the people who built the roads and bridges they live on. Give me a break. Hey, at this point, you do not get to feign indignance. Not after the ignorant and supercilious crap you've just spewed. Government at all levels is taking over half of our income in taxes. That is not a pittance, and you want to increase it. It's just like the mafia coming around again and saying, hey, we need more money from you in protection. In fact, I don't even think the mafia does this. Under this so-called contract, one side can just declare that you owe them more money, and you don't have anything you can do about it. What sort of contract is this? There's nothing anywhere in this article that wasn't completely fallacious or downright dishonest. But then, that's not surprising. If Robinson had to be honest, if he had to take a humble look at human interactions, and if he had to make his viewpoint consistent, he'd have to give up his cult of statism, the most dangerous religion ever devised. And as a fundy, he just can't do that. So, thanks for sitting through another video with me. I'm sorry this was kind of a long one, but as you can see, there was a lot to say about it, so if you sat through this, then you must feel it's worth something, so please hit like, subscribe, and the bell, or use the links below to donate via PayPal or crypto, or become a regular supporter on Patreon or Subscribestar. And you can also help me out just by watching these videos while running the Airtime extension, which you can get at airtime.bogosity.tv. Thank you very much. Until next time, stay strong and be free.